the OBGMA September regular meeting to order at 3 o'clock. I'm going to stand for, let's do the roll call first, I guess.
Director Daddy?
Here.
Director Finch?
Here.
Director Wyrick?
Here.
Director Thielke?
Here.
And Chair Hages.
Here.
Thank
Oh.
you.
Okay, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if there's no objections, Director Finch has to leave it a little before 4, so we're going to move to the first two action items, and then we'll come back to the regular agenda.
Just real quick, maybe Peter, Mr. Candy can chime in on this, but I know Director Thielke's online, but we didn't notice his absence the way we're supposed to go through a process. You're supposed to, whenever somebody's out and they're going to participate in the meeting, if they're out of town, you got to post a notice on the door, and the public's allowed to go into the meeting. Even if it's out of state someplace, but it's,
Well, I think that's been waived.
has that been waived?
It's part of the emergency because we're,
Okay. But we didn't post him, so I don't know if he can vote on any of these actions tonight.
yeah, I don't think that's until after January. I think that sunsets in January.
Peter, do you have any comment on that? Peter, Candy?
Yeah, thanks, John. I apologize because I actually don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
The meeting, as I understand, was noticed for the city council chambers, and that's the place where the public would come and attend. And I don't see a problem with Director Thielke attending remotely. I don't know if we would have to do a separate notice for that. I could check on that and report back to the board, and maybe in the exercise of caution, it may be not appropriate for Director Thielke to be voting on actions today.
If we get to a 2-2 tie, then his vote doesn't count.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's moot.
Yeah,
I just wanted to bring it up in case there's an issue.
thank you.
Okay, item number 7A. John.
Yes, thank you. And we've got a bunch of information for you on this. This is related to the governor's executive order N-7-22, related to what groundwater sustainability agencies have to do as far as verification that any wells going in the basin are consistent with the groundwater sustainability plan, and it also requires responsibility of the owner to determine, and in this case, we believe via the county, especially because they did put a requirements memo together that says that the well owner is going to have to prepare a study to look at if there's any undue influences of the new well on surrounding wells, and if there's any issue related to subsidence. The issue that I'm really bringing before you tonight is that water wells, OBGMA has called their document for applications a water well permit. And the reality is the agency doesn't permit wells. It provides conditions and says these are the conditions you have to meet. It's a registration form, those kind of things. But the county of Ventura is actually the one that has to permit the well. And they have all their construction standards and things of that nature. I wanted to bring this forward tonight, and Mr. Candy and I have talked about it, because I think if we do away with this term permit, I still think we can meet any conditions that the county requires of OBGMA, which means we will need to provide a verification if the well's within the Groundwater Sustainability Agency and it's over 2 acre feet of production annually. But I think we were trying to get, and the discussion also came about because Mr. Candy and I were talking about how at some point we had to be careful because is this a ministerial action by OBGMA to provide authority to move forward with a well, or is there some kind of CEQA process involved? And so we want to be careful about that. And I guess the more we get into as an agency of setting conditions, it could drive it more towards the CEQA process. So if we just take a position that the agency will provide the verification as required by the governor's executive order, which will take some analysis, and unfortunately, the well owners that will be applying for this, in my opinion, will have to pay for that analysis. Then I think we may shield ourselves from having to worry about all the CEQA stuff. And if, I know the board may have some discussion on this, but if we head in that direction, I did talk to Trevor at Dudek. They are actually doing this work for other groundwater sustainability agencies. So what they do is they take the well application, they look at it, look at the location, they look at the production, and then they determine through an analysis, and it's more of a letter report, I believe, that would say, yes, the well is consistent with the groundwater sustainability plan. So, Trevor, do you want to chime in on this with your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just, let me share screens here and also say, as a firm, we're helping agencies grapple with this, but I think that everyone, all of the clients that we work with are kind of in the same, trying to figure out exactly what is this going to look like as well permits start to come in and the agency has to provide verification. So it is complicated, but I think that the groundwater sustainability plan, as it's written now, is it provides a nice framework for how the agency can consider addressing this. So like John said, I'm going to give a brief overview of kind of our approach that we've taken in other basins on how to deal with the well verification process. Again, it's not providing the well permit. It's providing verification of whether or not the well is consistent with the GSP. And it builds again on the presentation that Jordan provided last month. I really laid out a nice framework of what the ministerial versus the kind of subjective process might look like. I hesitate to use the word subjective because we can be as quantitative as we can be through the review process. But I took a snapshot of the executive order that is directly applicable to the GSA. That's Section 9 of Executive Order N722. Everyone's familiar with it by this point. I've color-coded the different sections of it to kind of highlight where they might be applicable, where the section highlighted in blue provides some information about which wells are exempt from the executive order from this process. The section in brown applies to what John just mentioned in terms of the Ventura County requiring new well applicants to assess the impact to nearby wells and then potentially subsidence. And then section A in yellow is really what the GSA should be considering moving forward as new wells are drilled in the basin. And the crux of this really is, again, just an overview: a county, city, or public agency shall not approve a well permit without written verification from the GSA that the well is consistent with the groundwater sustainability plan as it's written, or the groundwater sustainability goal of the basin as it's written in the GSP. So the question is, how do we define whether or not a well is consistent, right?
I'm sorry, could you speak up or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's kind of garbled.
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize. Is that any better? Not really?
Yeah.
Get closer to the mic, it'll help.
Yeah. Let me scooch off to this side here. All right, let me see if that does it. If not, I can try and connect a headset really quickly and go from there. Would you guys prefer a headset?
Yes.
Okay, give me 1 sec. I'm going to stop sharing. Connect some headphones.
And one one of the things while Trevor's doing that, I'd like to mention, one of my thoughts is, and of course, we'll need to work, if the board decides they want to go in a different direction as we're talking about tonight. I think we get rid of the word permit. Essentially, it really is an application for well registration, request for verification to comply with the GSP, and then the other item would be acceptance of OBGMA conditions and requirements, as far as paying your extraction fees and whatever else that's got to be done. So I think this form will take a different life, is my opinion, but certainly it's up to the board how they want to move forward with this.
As long as we can include our conditions, metering, for example, I think, you know.
This form does say you have to now install a meter, but there's many other things that
Yeah.
we need to say, these are the conditions in order to have a well in the basin.
And that would be submitted to the county. And then would they request this? Would the initial application go to county? And then they request this from the OBGMA, and then it's returned to county as part of their permitting process? Is that what?
As I understand it, and I haven't been through the process, but as I understand it, the county sends the applicant to us. We ask them to complete this form.
Okay.
And once it's complete and signed and the board approves it.
And we send it back to county?
We send it back to the county.
Okay. I'm sorry, that was a,
So, as a person going through it, that's correct. The county has kicked me back to United Water, and I don't think we necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, because other agencies are in the same thing. And I think we could look to ask United what they're doing. Just
Yeah, that's all great. Can you guys hear me okay? Test.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So back to how other agencies are dealing with this and how the OBGMA may deal with this is as it's outlined in the GSP. What would be consistent with the groundwater sustainability plan or not? So what's really nice about the GSP is there are really quantitative metrics that define what's considered sustainable for the basin. As it's outlined in Chapter 3 of the GSP notes what the sustainability goal for the Ojai Valley Basin is. It's to preserve and protect the quantity and quality of groundwater, to maintain long-term supply for the common benefit of water users in the basin. And then it also outlines conditions for what would be considered sustainable or conditions that are in line with the sustainability goal for the basin. And those are four specific goals, four specific conditions outlined in the GSP. One is that the long-term aggregate groundwater use is less than or equal to the basin's sustainable yield. The second is that groundwater levels are maintained at elevations that avoid undesirable results. And those would be elevations that remain above the established minimum threshold groundwater elevations set at the representative monitoring points. And then the last two conditions are associated with groundwater quality as they're measured at municipal and domestic wells to ensure that there's long-term stability or improving trends in groundwater quality and that groundwater quality remains suitable for existing beneficial uses. And then the GSP also outlines potential likelihood of undesirable results occurring. So just as a note of what's outlined in the GSP. I have a couple different, just highlighting these are the three main conditions we're going to look at. What's the effect of the new well on the long-term aggregate groundwater use? What's the effect of the new well on groundwater levels in their relation to minimum thresholds? And what's the potential effect on groundwater quality? And again, so what could be kind of how the agency may approach this is through kind of what I'm considering a three-step process. We look at each of these three criteria separately. What are the impacts of the long-term aggregate production? We know that in the GSP, the estimated sustainable yield is about 4,100 acre-feet per year. We have historical estimates of groundwater production. We can then add on to that what the new well is anticipated to cause in terms of total groundwater usage in the basin and assess the impact that may have on long-term sustainability in terms of total groundwater production within the sustainable yield. And that's a relatively simple assessment. The current well permit on OBGMA's website asks the applicant to provide the projected pumping rate. So there's some information about what the well is anticipated to operate at. The second is to assess the impacts on sustainability indicators. So that would be specifically on groundwater levels as they relate to the established minimum threshold. Those impacts of the new well can be relatively simply addressed through the use of distance drawdown calculations that are relatively simple analytical mathematical solutions that we can run in a spreadsheet and make some predictions about if the well operates at this pumping rate located here, what's the projected drawdown at the closest representative monitoring point or key well. And then we can make an assessment of whether or not that proposed pumping rate is anticipated to lead to minimum threshold exceedances, which would be inconsistent with the sustainability goal for the outlined in the GSP. For larger projects that could involve something a little more complicated, like including the use of the numerical model to simulate the effect of pumping over a longer term period. But again, that would be really what I would consider an end member case where someone anticipates to pump a lot over the next 50 years. And that would, again, just as a snapshot, this is what those minimum thresholds look like. We have the specific key wells or representative monitoring points across the basin. Each of those key wells has a minimum threshold established in the GSP that defines what's considered the onset of an undesirable result. So we can make predictions about how the new well will impact water levels at a key well. And the third would be to assess the surrounding groundwater quality. So we have GIS information about where groundwater quality may be locally impaired in the basin. We can make some assessment about the proximity of the new well to these kind of lower quality groundwater, and then make some assessment again of the potential impacts that may have and whether that may impact usability long term. So all of that goes into how would this actually work out. So again, as was just discussed, the permitting agency would filter an application or the applicant to the GSA, and they would need to provide the GSA with the proposed production rate of the well and an accurate well location. So that whoever does the analytical assessment can make some reasonable predictions about how proposed operations are going to impact conditions at nearby wells or groundwater quality. The GSA would then perform the technical assessment for the non-exempt wells. So those would be wells that are not de minimis or used solely for public water system supply. We could assess the impact of the proposed pumping rate on the sustainable yield, on the onset of undesirable results, and the impact of groundwater quality, and potentially the impact of nearby projects. So if the agency is implementing projects that better constrain conditions in the basin that help their understanding of overall sustainability, it's something the agency can consider whether or not that gets put into the criteria of noting whether or not a well is consistent with the GSP. And then effectively it comes down to the GSA providing a technical assessment to the permitting agency, whether or not the well is consistent with the GSP or inconsistent with the GSP. And its findings will be based on the results and criteria. What that might look like is some modifications to the current well permits that include a set of questions. I've provided just an example shown here. Again, this is nothing that, this is something that the agency needs to develop on their own, but it could be used as a starting point if the agencies, as they grapple with this. Is the well exempt, right? This upper question is it a de minimis well or public water system supply well? And if the well's exempt, then there's some notes that say the well's exempt and not, it doesn't have to go through the steps that would be required for GSA validation of GSP consistency. Then there's a criteria on whether or not the projected project drawdown or projected well drawdown will cause minimum threshold exceedances, whether or not the proposed pumping rate would exceed the sustainable yield, impact future projects, or likely cause exceedances of minimum thresholds for groundwater quality. So it could be a set of questions that would be appended to the current well permitting application that's currently on OBGMA's website. that then would be filtered back again to the actual well permitting agency, Ventura County, with a stamp. Either it's consistent with the GSP based on these criteria, and obviously there would be work that goes along with each of these notes that provides the technical justification for the findings presented herein, or the well is inconsistent for these reasons, and the GSA may consider also providing recommendations for if the well the applicant would like to still construct the well, what some criteria might be in order to operate the well within the proposed sustainability goal of the agency. And with that, that's a really high level, quick overview, just providing, again, how we're dealing with this with other agencies and other basins, and how they are assessing new well consistency with what the GSP outlines in terms of overall sustainability for the basin. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions or pass it back off to John.
Jim, just real quick, I just mentioned that I think it's important that the agency starts to have a basis for, in the future, for verification of a new well. And I don't think that's just signing a form that says we verify. So I think there's got to be some documentation to show how that analysis came about. Just lastly, I think I included this in the board package. It's first page of Ordinance 8, which does talk about the no fee permit, but the reality, most all the other language in here says it's really a registration of the well to the agency, and you need to follow these conditions. So my thought would be, moving forward, number one, we probably need to update this ordinance in some fashion or another. The board need to make a decision about how they want to go through the verification process. And we've got permits pending that at some point have to get dealt with, but some of them we can't sign off on right now until we meet this executive order.
Sure.
Yes.
John, Newsom's executive orders are famously ambiguous at times. Do we have a clear definition of what is meant by alteration in the governor's executive order? In other words, some things are obvious alterations, going deeper with the well. Reworking an existing perforation, is that an alteration? Is putting in a larger capacity pump an alteration? Do we have a definition of alteration? Or are we going to have to supply one?
I haven't seen a definition of that. Certainly there's, I guess, maybe in some cases you might consider that industry practice, what's alteration of a well, kind of a thing. But typically it means, like you said, new pumps, you could be putting in new well casings. I don't think cleaning a well.
Repairing an existing pump would not be.
No,
Cleaning
I
an
don't-
existing
no.
casing would not be.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that possibly to avoid,
Yeah.
would it be, maybe I'm being too picky here, but I'm just wondering whether we might want to actually supply a definition.
Well, but and maybe I can add reality. It doesn't take any permits to clean and
Right.
replace as is.
Right.
So, I mean, they don't even come knocking on.
So you don't think this executive order changes that?
No, I don't, I don't know, and Jordan's here, you can't deepen a well unless you go smaller.
Right.
You can only sleeve down, you can't sleeve up a well. So that most alterations are going to the less side.
Right. Well, it's probably a non-issue.
So I don't think,
Okay. I just worry about Newsom's executive orders.
no,
They're kind of famous
and
for,
that's what I'll
you know,
speak to it,
not being clear.
yeah.
But if it's not an issue,
Yeah, real
For what
quick
it-
on that
it's
on that
not
front. We
always-
often use the words you can work with impunity within an existing casing. But if you alter that casing, add perforations, that could put an aquifer into production that would otherwise be sealed off from said well.
Okay.
Or if you're deepening it or lining it or adding any kind of seal, all of these things have always required county permits.
okay.
So I think the alteration would stand as Jim's.
Probably
as
no
Jim-
change then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as the county is the authority that they have to go to.
Correct.
I don't think we want to be in that position where we're asking something beyond what the county asks.
Okay.
Did you go through this GSP thing with United? Jim?
I'm going
Okay.
through it. So, and there is something that if I drill immediately adjacent to my existing well, that there's some exemption they feel. Because I think we ought to talk about what the reality is. Trevor, thank you for all, but I think what's applicable in a lot of districts or basins, excuse me, may not be that important. Well, that applicable in ours because our basin is fully pretty much built out, quote unquote, with ag in most of it, wells in most of it, or houses. And so the two that are going to come up most are exempt, I think. But replacement wells, I think, will be coming up here over the next 20 odd years because so many of these were done post World War II and are, 60, 70 years old. So to me, the location and siting of this has the biggest impact to, and interpreting from the governor's thing, the drawdown to your neighbor's well and mispositioning it is the biggest one. And then there's so much emphasis put on new wells rather than new plantings. A new well doesn't necessarily cause any new water usage. It just draws it out of a different straw. New plantings are where the water usage comes from. So to me, I think we ought to do some of this stuff, but if there's a replacement thing and a letter from a geologist that quickly addresses, drawdown to any well, so your monitoring well would be picked up on your drawdown to an existing well, and to the neighbor, Jordan can speak to water quality. I just don't see in our basin how that changes much, if it's a replacement well. Then there ought to be kind of a, check these two boxes and advance to go without much of a review and cost on our part to a DUDAC. And we could use Jordan sometimes, but he might be conflicted out at other times. But that's when, let's not make something so complicated in this that doesn't need to be. If we had thousands of acres of just sagebrush in the middle of our basin, then I think all of these questions would come into play and be applicable on a new well that's going to develop, barren land. But that just isn't reality for us. The two that I think are going to, or the type of wells that are going to be done most are exempt. Thank you.
Or municipal, yeah.
I was just going to mention one thing the board might want to consider through whatever process we decide is the applicant is going to have to do that analysis, assuming it's in the GSA, of looking at interference.
Right. No.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that interference report be completed before we do any kind of analysis.
That is how United. So I've had to hire a geologist and it was, so he's looking at it for a siting, either near or in a different spot and looking at the wells. That's the main thing.
So again, United's plowed this field already. We can get some template from it.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Or at least be on the same template, and at least there's two of us that are making the wrong mistakes.
Yeah.
Same mistakes, I should
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I think the main thing is making sure that this is coordinated with the county, so our conditions aren't overlooked.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I say I'm going to call Jeff Dorrington at the county, because he's the one that's been involved, I think, in helping to draft this county notice. But I also have seen where he's replied to some of the people that have put in for approval of well permits from OBGMA. And so he's very active in this whole issue. And so
All right.
I think he'll be the one we want to talk with.
So we have to look at some modifications to ordinance 8. Is that the main action we have to take?
I'm
eventually?
not really, I guess I'm asking the board just to give us direction to continue to move forward, to kind of ferret this out and figure out what the process might be. I hear you and I agree with you. We don't want to make this complicated, you know, not only for the agency, but for the potential well owners. They're going to have to probably, this is going to cause some additional costs for them, and we don't need to load them up on a lot of cost either.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that if we're going to follow this, I want to have an agency approved process that at least down the road, whoever's sitting on the board or who's ever sitting in this chair understands what has to be done. So I'm just saying, I'm just asking the board to let us proceed. We'll look at ordinance 8. We'll look at the well registration permit application form that we have, and we'll talk to United, and we'll talk to Jeff Dorrington and come back with some additional information.
But I definitely think there could be an incorporation of a check mark for a replacement well. A
Yeah.
replacement versus new is a huge difference.
Right.
Yeah. Is it a condition that they destroy the old one after it's finished?
I think that's a county
County deal.
permit.
Okay.
I don't think that's so much basin. I think that's county.
Jim, would you go back and elaborate on something you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is putting a well next to a well? I want to explain the dynamics of that. Why would you put a well next to a well?
Because power and pipelines. So Edison's about 10 grand to pull. It used to be 10, now they're probably 15 or 20 grand to pull to place it. So I think the county's requirement is 50 feet outside of your old well. So you can underground the utility and you just tie in your pipe, there close by.
So it's ancillary cost, not amount of water or...
Correct. I don't know. Well next to like if your neighbor's well was still staying, that's different. Your old well, I don't think it matters if you're abandoning it.
Or
that's what you're talking about, is your own well.
You're keeping the infrastructure, you're abandoning a well, putting in a new one, keeping the infrastructure.
Keeping it
and
close
cutting-
by,
and
yeah.
Cutting down on the
And normally
service costs.
those well locations are open-ish, and they have power and the pipelines go to the wells. I mean, it's the same for the community facility district. All their wells are within 10 acres or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if it's tagged a replacement well, you're certainly not going to pump two wells close to each other.
Right.
You're just going to suck water
These
down.
guys might.
Yeah, we do that. All right, if there's no objections, John will put together the necessary amendments to the ordinance and
Yeah, ordinance, and we'll look at, again, the application form to OBGMA, talk to the county, and we'll talk to United, see what their process is.
all right, you had some comment?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Andrew Stassi, 4510 Grand Avenue. I was before your board last month. And thank you, Mr. Mundy, for taking my letter. You're very generous to do that. So we have been doing some research because we have a client, as you know, that has a permit. It's our understanding that the order is not retroactive regarding the permit. That still doesn't resolve the issue of obtaining a letter regarding sustainability. The permit is valid, but we don't have the necessary letter regarding sustainability to go to the county. We completely concur. You are not in the well permitting business. That's the county's purview. However, you are in the water extraction business, if you want to put it that way. And perhaps you might want to consider whether you call it a permit or an analysis, it's regarding water extraction, not the permitting of a well or the building of a well. I did speak pretty extensively with Jeff Dorrington at the county, and they're of the belief that what they're looking from the GMA is the analysis. They're looking for a separate analysis from an engineer, a qualified engineer from the applicant regarding the conflict with nearby wells and subsidence. They are not necessarily looking at that analysis or looking for that analysis from your agency. And it makes sense because it would be duplicative. Otherwise, they're going to have to analyze it either way. So I don't know that that is an area that you need to go to or that you want to. I also spoke with Timothy Goodwin at the Department of Water Resources. They're basically they are of the same belief. They believe that the GSA or GMA's responsibility is to review the sustainability issue and to provide information to the permitting agency, in this case, which is the county, regarding sustainability. They're really not looking to create a process that's complex. They're really, his quote words were just asking you to step back and be thoughtful regarding this process. We don't want a runaway train in these regarding sustainability. They definitely don't want this to be more than a ministerial process. This should not be a discretionary process, and their belief is to keep it simple. Beyond that, I still have a client who has a permit. Who's looking for some direction, and we're trying to define, if nothing else, what the timeline might be regarding developing whatever it is that you're going to develop.
How big a well what's the estimated extraction?
4 acre feet. And I guess I understand that, when you get an executive order, you're trying to figure out what the meaning of is, and that's completely understandable. In our case, it's kind of between a rock and a hard place because they have a permit, and the order is not retroactive, but we're minus a statement. So I don't know if there's a possibility of an exception. The other issue that you brought up, which is kind of interesting regarding alteration, what is alteration? Is alteration pumping more water, potentially, out of a well? And I did speak to Jeff Dorrington, who spoke to County Council regarding this, because we have a permit, and I suggested to him, well, could we utilize our permit and come back in with the issue, a letter regarding sustainability? In other words, if somebody pulls a permit for 2 acre feet or less, which doesn't require the letter or the subsidence requirement, could they come back in later after defining all of that and increase their production? And County Council is of the belief that you can't. I don't necessarily agree with them, because what difference does it make? Ultimately, if a study is a study, 2 acre feet, and if you prove that more than 2 acre feet, it would be sustainable and wouldn't require subsidence at a later date, what difference does it make? But that's an argument for a later date, but that's their position at this point. So I don't know if there's anything that you can help us with regarding the retroactive nature or a timeline as to how our client might be able to enact his permit, if you want to put it that way. But that would be helpful. And then, again, we agree that keep it simple, keep it ministerial, and you might want to consider allowing the county to review the issue of subsidence and competition with adjacent wells.
Well, as noted in our handout that you have, subsidence isn't an issue in our basin. Mm-hmm. We're so rocky.
More of a Central Valley issue.
We actually showed whatever the opposite of subsidence is. We had growth in the middle of some things on some studies. I'm all for helping this along because it's at 4 acre feet. It seems to me that if we could get something that at least it stated geologically that it didn't impact other wells, That's the one thing on siting that we do have talked about and that I talked about. On a 4 acre foot well, if we had something on file, I'd be good with.
Yeah, and the county has said that's a requirement of their permit.
Yes, so the county's following the executive order. They don't have a choice. So they must obtain a letter. In this case, it would be I would call it an addendum to our permit, in my client's particular case, regarding sustainability, regarding conflict with your plan. However, they are not looking to the OBGMA to obtain a letter regarding subsidence or conflict with other wells. They're just looking for a independent, qualified geologist's opinion that they will review as a matter of fact.
Right.
And that's the end of it.
Well, and I think we would also review it. I mean, but it's easy enough, if it says there's nothing around it, it doesn't take Jordan to figure that one out. Sorry, Jordan.
Well, it's in essence, it's in essence, in other words, they're not debating the opinion. If the boxes are checked,
Right,
that's
exactly
what they're looking for.
Because I do fear for you and for all of us that if Bennett's bill goes through, then we're into CEQA. So I'm all for helping this thing.
But the only thing that you're required to obtain on your own for the county is an opinion that there's no interference. Is that correct? And then we're responsible for the other items here.
You're responsible for however you want to qualify it. It could be a simple analysis. I assume. I assume that when it's a pretty simple analysis when it's 4 acre feet. Basically what they're looking from you is 9A in the order, basically qualifying that there's not a conflict regarding sustainability and the plan.
All right.
That's
Well,
it.
if you or the county is going to provide us with the report that says there's no interference, then it would be pretty simple for our geologists to check off these others.
Well, I think the way the county is looking at it, and I believe the way the Department of Water Resources is looking at it, is that if you as the OBGMA knows that diligence is being taken care of. In other words, it's a requirement of the county, therefore it will be done. That's all the county's going to review that and make sure that those boxes are checked. The county's going to review that and make sure that the boxes, and the county looks at it as just redundancy from their perspective. So they're looking for only 9A from you, and they're looking for the applicant to give them 9B.
And I think that's an accurate statement. I think there's some other things that have been sort of misstated in this conversation, but that is an accurate statement. I think OBGMA's responsibility as a consulting agency in this process, not the permitting agency, but a consulting agency, is to do 9A and have to determine whether this permit application is consistent with our groundwater sustainability program. And that's the presentation that Trevor provided for you. And I think if the board were inclined to expedite this particular permit, they could kick this over to Trevor to do the analysis that he described in his presentation and come back forward with a recommendation as to whether or not this meets our groundwater sustainability program. I would suggest.
Then I'm confused, Peter. So you're saying the applicant doesn't submit the geology of it?
No, the applicant submits the geology on the question of well interference.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the GSA's responsibility to do the analysis whether the proposed permit application is consistent with groundwater sustainability program
Okay.
that the GSA has adopted.
Okay.
Yeah. My understanding, again, respectfully, is that it is not incumbent upon you to do that. It's incumbent upon the county to do that. And I think that's the direction that's coming from the state as well. But you folks can do your own analysis of that, of course.
If the board wants to wait until we've done everything as far as the forms and the ordinances and all that, it's going to be more than the next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to expedite if you have an interest in expediting permits, I could certainly revise some things and we can get an analysis done. I need to get in a cost estimate for that as well.
And if I don't mean to interrupt, sir, but just one other thing is that I don't think that for most of these well owners, when you look at the totality, the analysis of what they're trying to achieve, most of these wells are obviously they can't move forward without water. They can't. It's either planting or building a home. So the cost, if it's $500 or $1,000 or $2,000, that isn't the issue. It's not the issue. It's not the cost of the engineering. It's the process. That's what we're trying to define, process and timeline.
I don't know, I don't want to make light of it, but I don't think you need to do a whole lot of analysis to go through this checklist on this box for a 4-acre well. So I don't see why we can't provide, have Jordan, be the authority and provide the county with a letter or whatever it takes in the interim to get this taken care of.
But the applicant should
Yeah, submit the stuff to us.
submit the geological report that it's not interfering.
Right, exactly. We're not gonna do that.
We're not doing that, and then we can,
Right.
You can be assured the county will not provide a permit to build a well without 9B being completed.
well, it's the county, so I'm not sure about that statement.
Well,
We're not gonna.
I speak to Jeff Dorrington, man, they are, but I understand, having dealt with the county for 30 years,
But I think we deserve a copy of that report, whatever it is, that
of course.
satisfies that requirement.
I mean, basically what our client is looking at, they're, like I said, they have an anomaly, if you want to put it that way. They have a permit. The order is not retroactive, but they don't have a statement. So anything you can do to help push this along, be much appreciated.
Let me see what I can do over the next couple of weeks, and if we can bring something to you without getting everything completed.
Because this isn't setting a precedence, this is working on somebody that's caught in limbo land.
Correct. This is not we don't believe it's a precedent.
No, I don't see how it is.
And just one other suggestion, if you call it a permit, it doesn't really matter as long as it's not a permit to build a well. It's a permit to extract water, which is a different issue.
Mr. Stassi, did you folks go ahead and order that report, or are you just waiting
I
to
was just
find
about to
out?
ask that.
Well, we have some analysis that was originally done for the initial well permit, or just the analysis that was done, is there water in that location? So we would ask that engineer to complete that analysis in regards to subsidence and interference with adjacent wells.
Prudent to pull the trigger on the interference report.
Yeah, that's not we could certainly do that.
And how long would how old is the original one, and how long would it take
I think,
for you to get this thing moving?
I don't know, I can't remember what is this permit, 2 or 4 years old? I think it's 4 years old?
Wow.
I think it's 4.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
so we'd need
just-
something updated.
What's that?
I said it would need to be something that would be at least current.
It's current. My recommendation, put a sunset clause in your extraction permits.
And what kind of time frame you think you can accomplish that and get us the information?
I have to get a hold of the engineer. Good question. As long as he's not fishing, hopefully quickly.
Okay, that just lets us know how fast we need to react, because if he's telling you 2 months, because we've got a lot of calendar action.
I appreciate that, but I think anything you do would be contingent on what we do anyway. So
Right.
It would be appreciated regardless of what you can do.
Yeah, I think we can take care of this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, this is going to get ugly.
10 minutes for Jim?
You just say okay to the budget and we'll move on. All right, the next item is our estimated budget.
Yeah, I need to give you a little bit of update on this. There was some numbers I was verifying, and Trevor was kind to get it to me right before the meeting. The estimated budget overview I put together, it has a couple things in it that probably aren't going to happen right away, just because the timing and things. But for one, the total GSP expenses, I should have put line numbers on here, it would have been helpful for you. I showed that as 497,500. That was an annual cost based upon what was in the original groundwater sustainability plan. And so there was about $2 million worth of cost within that plan. Since then, Trevor has updated those costs, and right now it looks like over the 5-year period for the programs we're talking about, it's $1.3 million. So that reduces that to $230,000.
To what? 100?
If you look at it, if you look at that total GSP expenses,
Yeah.
it would be, I think that's right.
Reduces 497,500 to what?
You know what? Well, it's 266 if you just straight line it over 5 years.
266 a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, this also shows potential grant revenue, which I don't think is going to happen right away, but I don't see these expenses happening anytime soon. But I just wanted to plug them in there to give you an order of magnitude. When this stuff starts coming through and we got to do this work, what potentially is going to do to the budget? What it's going to do to revenue expenses?
Yeah. Well, whether we spend it each year, it's going to compound, and eventually we're going to have to spend the whole amount.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And in fact, I think the Prop 68 grant, I think you got to have that completed in a couple of years. Is that right, Trevor? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to, and we're talking about $1.3 million over 2 years. And so I'm a little concerned about timing and the amount of money and the grants and all those kind of things.
Is our accounting system set up fully to handle this move into the different silos for grant accounting? And how you allocate overhead of the agency over those silos?
Yeah, I don't think it's that automatic.
It's not automatic.
We're using QuickBooks.
Okay.
And so I know with the
Because
book,
this is a fund accounting system.
Yeah.
That we're kind of moving into an era of fund accounting that this agency's never engaged in before.
and with that QuickBooks, the bookkeeper was able to set up something in a last grant. But we have to make sure that when Jordan puts in his time, or I put my time, or Roberta, or somebody, whoever,
Right.
we charge it to that center.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
How you handle the overhead allocations to the different silos especially when you have more than one going on at one time.
Yeah.
So you think we can still do that within QuickBooks?
I wouldn't say we're not doing it as a percentage, we're doing it as here's the actual amount that's going to be charged to this bucket and this bucket and this bucket. It's kind of.
Or we think we can stay,
we
the
have-
software is adequate?
I think so. It's worked. Just got to make sure it gets put in there correctly.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
You know, and it's reasonably, you know, you get in accounting systems, they can cost you a lot of money too.
I know.
So,
know.
so I think what would happen if we reduce that number. Oh, you know what? I put the wrong spot here. I'm sorry. The GSP implementation expense is not 345, it's 266. So then that would be added to the
Oh, okay.
34,500 grant expenses, and then the 118,000 operating. And I clarified that also with Trevor today. The 118,000 is essentially for your GSA monitoring cost, activities, you know. And some of that, what Jordan's doing now, I guess we're going to have to, you talk about buckets, we're going to have to figure out how much of that is going to be really considered GSA expense in the future. And so that number works out to 0, 5, 10, 18, 10, 11, 418,000 versus 497, 418,500.
Certainly go in the right direction.
Yeah. So the bottom line is we won't be in a negative income number in the bottom.
Yeah, that's more than compensates the negative 31,
Yeah,
109.
And the revenues are based on our current
Are based on the
fees.
GSP adopted rates or extraction
Okay.
fees.
All right.
So this will have to be modified for the minutes, the modification.
Yes, I'll make sure it's modified and we'll get it done. But, you know, part of it's, the reality is if you just look above GSP expenses, that's really kind of the operating budget.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we need to at least adopt, something.
Part of the reason for the fund accounting, so you
Yeah.
don't conflate the
But I want,
operating with the
Yeah.
grants.
but I just wanted to give you a look at what, okay, well, here's our current operating revenue, here's our current operating expense.
Yeah.
What happens when you plug the GSP cost in there? This is what it does. And so that-
Sometimes the way it's presented is the operating, then you have the different funds, and if there's transfers needed, then you have a transfer
Yeah,
account
yeah, yeah.
between operating funds or funds to operating or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just saying that the future may require us to get a little bit more sophisticated.
I
than
would agree.
this, you know.
I agree.
Office supplies at 25,000, truly office supplies?
There was something about that.
Does it include the office?
No, it's down below at
Oh.
10.8.
Rent's there.
Rents and office supplies?
No, it's separate. You know,
Oh, there's rent, yeah, it's not an office
and the
supplies.
phone bill was not correct. I had to correct that.
Yeah, that was quite a phone system.
Yeah. And phone charge. Now, the phone charges should include phone, and we pay for a normal landline, and we
And-
pay for internet service.
And internet's, I thought internet, but the 25,000 for office supplies is separate from rent?
And the 34 for telephone.
Oh, it's
Oh, I
three.
got rid of that.
It's three.
I've updated that, unfortunately.
Yeah, we are,
On the one, yeah, I looked.
Bob and I jumped on that, so.
So I put telephone at 3,000, actually.
But what's in the 25,000
I,
office?
you know, I'm sorry, I don't have that answer.
Okay.
Let me bring that back. I mean, it's not a crisis if we don't adopt this
No.
today, but I'd just like to keep it moving forward so we,
So at least there's no urgency to jumping on some rate review right now. We're all right, at least for the time. I mean, we've got
Yeah.
some time to do an analysis to determine what we're gonna do
I mean, we've
next.
been spending money with Dudek through little projects now and then related to the things we've been talking about. So, but the GSP expense is done, pretty much.
Okay,
The report, all that's complete. So the revenues that are coming in are more than adequate to cover things that we need to do right now. It's just not totally all ferreted out related to implementation of the GSP.
all right.
At least until we get the DWR response.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe go back away from some of the stuff that's ridiculous, that wastes a lot of money. Said that. Glad.
Okay.
Yeah, can I ask a question associated with the review of the DWR review? The action of the State Control Water Resources Board to add, another 500,000 to the Kevin Delano model and further evaluate it and review it, is that gonna delay the final DWR review?
Another 500,000 or what, I'm sorry?
The State Control Water Resources Board, I think I said that right, had an action item, last week or week before last?
Yes,
That
yeah.
took all the public constructive comments from the public comment process and said, we think our model needs to be, I'm gonna say fixed or improved. And they added another 500,000 to the 2 million they've already spent on it,
Well, I think their
to work on it more.
projection, even before that came out, was it's gonna be 2 or 3 years before it's done.
Okay, so DWR will get their review done prior to that model being,
Well, we don't know when it's gonna
We don't
happen.
know.
we don't know.
I do get emails that talk about basins they have not approved, and they've sent them out,
Right.
you can have 6 months to correct the plan. I don't think the DWR is gonna wait on any changes in the model,
I hope not. I mean, they've been citing the model for some of the,
and, because I don't think that,
other agencies have been citing the model in their review of our sustainability plan.
Yeah.
But,
I don't think that model is, whether it's our model or their model, I don't think
Okay.
it's really that big a difference.
Okay.
And the reality is, there's a lot of projects in there that really don't take modeling, it's just things we need to do.
right. It's just, I thought it was interesting, it's like an acknowledgement it needed to be improved to add another 500K to model development.
Okay,
Chair,
yes.
I'll break it out a little differently. I'll update this a little differently, make it a little more clear. Okay. Show you the cost centers.
Bob?
reviewing one of these pages, Is there any guess as to the number of wells without meters, the numbers that aren't reporting, and the numbers that aren't paying, how much potential revenue we have out there?
Or what's the opportunity cost of maybe lost revenue that we're not getting?
You
Well,
remember-
I had a really unsettling,
But we don't, do you know the numbers off the top of your head?
oh, I don't need a giant number. No, I'm just bringing it up for discussion. I had a phone call from someone that was very unsettling to me, somebody I've known for 25 years, and he's alarmed that his electric bill for his well was $700. And I said, whoa, how did that happen? He said, well, evidently my wife went into some kind of agreement with the neighbor, and the neighbor is pumping like hell. And I said, are we getting accurate reports? And this person knows me well enough and said no. And so just between you and me, $700 in a single month is not this little de minimis
No, it
well that we're pumping out of Persimmon Hill. And between the ones that aren't paying, the ones that think they don't have to pay, the ones that don't acknowledge they have a well, the ones that don't have it metered, I really kind of think it's time that we move this thing forward.
Well, the
And
next item, Bob,
Yeah, we're getting there.
is that, so let's,
getting there.
let's do this under that item, which would
Okay.
be 7C.
I just thought it was part of the budget, like, it looks like there's
Yeah.
a lot of budget we're not getting, right?
Jordan's got a time constraint as well, so
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Item 5 a little quick here. And then I'll participate telephonically in the remainder of the meeting, since I'm already zooming to it. But talking today about the OHA conditions, it is the end of the water year, officially tomorrow, September 30th. But we call this one the breath of hope, in that we are here officially in autumn, and we're starting to see a little bit of changes. For the total of the water year, 15.02 inches on the valley floor, 23.15 on the ridge. The September storms that came through associated with some of the tropical moisture brought almost the same amount of water to the ridgetops as they did to the valley floor. Warmer systems will tend to do that. It was, a quarter of an inch here and there, and up to 0.4 up at the Hermitage
What
area.
did you do to stop that from coming over the mountains from Santa Clarita, Jordan? Did you pray to the wrong gods or something?
No, I think we weren't cloud seeding. Is that what it was? No. It's the nature of these subtropical systems that just, they will create bands that just isolate and find their way into certain orographies, and that's it.
It's amazing.
For this measurements we took this week, actually yesterday, we're at about 61% capacity, 191.36 feet below ground surface at the Q Elrod well, 48,800 acre feet. And this is why I'm thinking this is a breath of hope. If we look at each of the peaks over the past couple of years, you see a little bit of an inflection there in our 2022. Oops. Let's see if you can see that. Where I've circled that there, you see a little bit of a ski jump at the bottom of the run there. That gives us a little bit of hope. And then also, when I was collecting these data, you could actually feel a little bit of air, cool air, coming out of the well casing, indicating some degree of rising water level there. May have been from a pump shut off, but we call that a breath of hope. Hopefully that's blowing by 6 months from now as water levels are jumping up the way it was in 2019. Get back onto the. Yep. Okay. In the flow side of things, still very low flow as expected out of the basin. In fact, we're at 0.02 CFS as measured today. That's around 10 gallons per minute. And while we had 0.01 CFS last month, it's really such a small dynamic. It's hard to say it's much much different than less than 0.05 CFS. How does that look over time? Back in the spring and through the summer, and then the last couple months, we've had to create the weir at the location. That was last month, and this month it's even a little narrower. But that allows actually for a bit more accurate measurement of that stream flow. And then real quickly, we installed the loggers in each of the 4 wells to which we have access in the purchase system and the city in cooperation with Ojai Valley Sand. How does that look? Just up from the lower campus of Ojai Valley School in Matilaha Junior High. This is the GW6. That's what that looks like. Get a measurement, put our logger down, run over to the next one. This one's near the dumpster at Sarzati Park. You'd have to really know what you're looking for to find it. But we do, and we did. Depth to water 15.37 and a logger installed. Running over to the north end of Signal Street, and that one's actually in a street. Same story, but that was 21.41 feet. And then back up just north of Sarzati Park, another well that's in a street. Pretty easy access here, wide open, and a 15.7 foot depth to water. We're logging these every 90 minutes as well as the other ones. So there you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate the.
Well, germane to later discussion, I would hope the common sense engineering associated with your weir construction could be applied to the spreading grounds as well.
Once upon a time, it was only railroad ties that held back the flow and/or were absent and let it in. Maybe that comes back. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jordan. All right, now we'll move back to the beginning of the agenda here and finish these out. The item is next is public comments, items that are not on the agenda. If there's any public that would like to make a comment to the board. Anyone out there, Roberta? Okay, next item is director announcements. Bill?
I don't have any, sorry. No.
Nothing for me other than the guy with the giant electric bill, which I thought
Yeah,
was a
well, that's
little.
Well,
interesting.
hey,
We're gonna go to that one next.
well, you want to keep everybody happy in the house with air conditioning. You talking about a giant electric bill for your house?
No, this one is only hooked up to one pump on a well.
Oh, your well. Okay.
Not my well. I don't have a well, but this is somebody in Persimmon Hill, and that is a bill.
Oh, you're probably supporting that 100% renewable.
No, there is no renewable. I mean, it's a.
Talking about the CCA, Bob.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is 60% unknown, right? Got it. Okay. So other than that, nope, nothing on my end. But
I don't have anything either.
I tell you what, Jordan said some things that I think were just absolutely staggering, and I don't think there's anybody that has this concept. We have a lot of people that are concerned with water, but I don't really think that they understand that the water level is 15 feet down below the lawn at Sarasota Park, or it's 10 feet down here. The only conscious visual that anybody ever got was that sump pump we put in at the skate park on our own, so we could pump it. People would walk by, see it coming out of the wall, they go, "Hey, we're good." Of course, we're not. That's not now. But maybe there's something we could do to put some little tiny bracket somewhere within our site that shows the logger surface. I think that would go a long way to let a lot of people know that, no, the sky is not falling and we're not evaporating and bad things are happening. And the oak trees have got plenty of roots and they can get down 15 feet and everything's not going to die.
I don't know. We can think about that.
Okay.
All right, John, do you have any comments?
Just briefly, our bookkeeper has given us a 30-day notice.
Oh, great.
Bookkeeper's given a 30-day notice, so she's been good. She's
Yeah.
been really good. But we're going to meet with her next week, and we'll figure out what next steps. Roberta thought maybe she could take it on, but we'll see how that goes. Because my concern for her is not that she can't do it. It's just I don't want her to be overloaded.
Yeah.
And our bookkeeper was pretty inexpensive, quite frankly. It's $500 a month. It was pretty reasonable. And then lastly, the other thing, Ojai Day is October 15th, and we'll have a booth there. So I think that's it. That's all I have.
Okay, the next item.
Richard, could I make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, you guys were talking about the electricity bill. That might be something you might want to look at. If they do not have a meter on their actual well, ask them for their electricity bill. If it's a single use meter for their pump, that way you guys can actually find out what's going on with their usage to sort of put some reality as to what's happening in their usage.
Yeah, that's true, Peter. I think that is something we can do. I mean, the Fox Canyon GMA used electric bills for quite a while to estimate usage.
OBGMA has used them in the past.
Have we? Okay.
Crop factors and some other things, but get back to Bob's comment. Some of the issues that were, access to the property is maybe an issue for us. Just, homeowners going to let us just walk on and do that. So the other thing is, I don't think, to answer Director Daddy's comment or question, I don't think you're ever going to get accurate reading unless OBGMA physically reads the wells, meters on the wells, and or has automated reading equipment, because the system's now self-reporting.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, we're going to have to go to automatic reads.
Right.
Well, the other thing that comes up with that too is the Upper Ventura River basically says when you turn in your reading, take a picture of it and send it with your bill.
Yeah.
Well,
that way you got verification.
Yeah. We've asked for pictures. I don't think they've always sent them, but. Yeah. So that's a good thing to add to our statements.
Is that something that we should make note of and put a goal for automated and be done with this?
Well, I think one of the items that we applied for the grant is for metering.
I had Dudek add that to this, for this grant we would be looking at.
I mean, I think if we went with automatic, we'd probably reduce from 180 down to 140 or 150 wells. A number of people wouldn't be using them.
Yeah.
We have a number that are so small that if we started collecting that minimum acre-foot charge, we may end up with 120 real wells, and they're all automated, and we know what they are, and therefore then there's no there's no issue.
Yeah.
I'd like to get to that point if we can. That would be my goal.
Yeah. No, I agree. And the ones that are on our list that don't report, we could establish a minimum charge and put it on the tax roll.
Right.
We don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, I did get something from the county on that. They talked about a whole assessment district and everything. I'm not talking about establishing an assessment district.
No.
I'm just talking about, maybe a handful of charges being put on the tax roll so we can collect the money.
Yeah, you don't have to do that. The sewer district,
Yeah.
they put their fee.
Yeah.
And it's a fee. It's
Yeah.
not a property tax. It's a fee.
So,
But one other thing on actual having them take pictures, that would be inclusive of the de minimis users to show that they're not using over 2 acre-feet a year. You can actually look at it other ways. Well, I'm not using it, but you're taking verification on them for verbal, and you really don't have any requirements on de minimis users as to how they report. So my thought on it is that if you're a de minimis user, you need to send a picture with your, just like everybody else does every 6 months or whatever.
is part of any automated program, my early thinking is probably have to go in there and maybe modify a majority of those wells with new meters. Because the homeowners right now, the property owners, are left to put in whatever meter. We tell them just put in a meter.
No, I know.
It can be
there has to
multiple
be.
brands, and so it may be more than just the automated reading equipment at some point, but it's all part of what we'll have to define the program to be.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And if we can do that, and we can do that through a grant, I think that helps the well owner. They don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, and it cuts our operating costs.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, item 7C is the letter that regarding this issue.
Yeah, and Director Hages gave me some background information, try to make it simple, one page. I broke it up into active wells and inactive wells. And I don't know if we want two separate letters, make it even more simple for people. But essentially, it just tells them they need to have a well, they need to have a meter, and they need to report that. And certainly, I think we could provide other information, especially to pumpers that are not reporting. We can show them the extraction statements and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So it may not just be the letter, but does the board have a preference on whether it's just one letter like this, or?
Well, my only question about separate letters is we do have people with a registered active well with no extraction.
That's true.
And so we might want to tell them, you got to make a choice here. And that would mean, tend to mean having everything on the same letter, where, you know, this is what you're going to have to pay even though you have no extraction with a registered well, and if you don't want to pay that, you're going to have the well shut in.
Well, and in fact, they're required to pay at least a wellhead fee.
Right.
It's a minimum.
Yeah.
So,
Whether it's
And a
active or
recordation
not.
fee.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking one letter would be better in that respect.
Oh, that's right, the minimum of $12.50.
I'd make a suggestion that there are no inactive wells. Inactive wells are shut down and
Okay,
certified by the health
measured
department.
extraction wells, how about that?
How about, yeah, no, we only have active wells, and,
Okay.
or we have decommissioned wells that should be
Anyway, that's why I'm thinking maybe.
inspected by the health department to make sure that they're properly closed down.
Right, that's why I'm thinking it should be one letter.
Yeah, I think it should be one letter. They have to make a choice. They're going to have it destroyed, or they're going to pay the fee.
Right.
And if they're actually using it, they're going to have to comply with the metering requirements.
Right.
Okay.
And this is intended to be the first outreach to these people. And hopefully we'll get responses from quite a few of them, and it'll thin down the number that we're going to have to take additional action with.
You know, typically these kinds of letters, there's a date they need to respond by.
Yeah,
There's no date in this letter, I don't think.
I got it.
Could be very permissive, but it's just something.
Sure. No, agreed.
We're going to have to look into this further if we don't have a response from you by a certain date.
The biggest concern that I guess I've had, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, you know, we can send all these letters, we can get a respond by date, and at some point, we just may have to have access.
Well,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Of course.
there may be some issues related to that, so we'll figure that out
Yeah.
when the time comes. But
Well, I think we're going to run into a few that are, they're going to want to resist. And, you know, hopefully we can get that down to a minimum number. It won't be that bad. But I think to answer Bob's question, wouldn't hurt to have an estimate of how much we're losing just in wellhead fees.
Yeah.
Lost wellhead fee. Yeah, I've got a list here of things to answer his questions, so.
Okay.
Wells with no meters, wells not paying, which could be wells with no meters and also wells that have meters. I mean, so it's gonna take a little effort to go through some of this, but.
And people think that de minimis means they don't have to pay.
Yeah.
So explanation.
That's not what it
I mean, there's a plethora out there, and this is going to be a sea change for people.
Yeah.
But my concern is if they don't want to comply and they don't want to notice and they don't want to pay and they don't want to report, there's generally a good reason.
Right, but in this declared drought emergency, now's the psychological time to do this.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed.
And I
Well-
do think there's a significant number that are probably abandoned, that people don't even know they're there, because the way the county keeps the records, that's where we got the record. Those are old. So I personally know two people that have wells, but they can't even find them. They don't know where they're at on the property. They bought the property, the drill well was there for 50 years, and they don't know where it's at. And they're small wells, but
Yeah.
they're still listed, so it would be nice to be able to clean this up. So,
Yeah, it would be nice to close them up, just to make sure we don't get any surface water intrusion.
Yeah,
We don't get any
they're
surface pollution, we don't
required to
get
destroy 'em, yeah.
contamination. I mean, that's really what I'm worried about.
Part of
Yeah.
it being the property owner, you're gonna have to find your well.
yeah,
But it's not inexpensive to do that.
no.
I know,
they have
but
to go in
they
and
bought
knife-
the property and.
Yeah, they have to go in and knife the casing, and then they got to fill it full of cement.
Yeah, well, it's a county requirement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah.
There's a whole
They have to
process.
find it,
for Yeah.
and they have to find it.
Yeah, that's true. Okay,
That is, you have what you need, John?
I got
on
enough,
that?
yeah. I got a couple comments here, and we'll just clean it up and
Yeah, just go ahead and
get
let's
it out.
do it.
I want to, before we send this out, though, I want to get those numbers that Director Daddy has asked for, so we know exactly who to send it to.
Yeah.
That'll help.
All right, treasurer's report.
I'll just,
Before we go, do we want to put anything in here that gives people a preview of how much meter costs are, what this costs are? Do we want to just wait until we see what the response is?
I think you want to
'Cause-
encourage response. You probably don't
Because
want-
we're going to have people say, okay, how much is this new meter going
That
to
will, I
cost?
think, be the second contact.
And that's fine. I'm just saying,
If you want to
let's
encourage
plan to where we're
response.
going to be and put it down in a step. This is going to be a process.
I just
We're
think-
not going through this process in
You
the
don't want
next
to
3
inhibit
months.
initial response, is what I'm.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this next year at this time, I'm sure. Oh, I'm sure. I know some of the people up there. I insure some of the people up there. I know exactly who they're going to be.
Well, I think the thing is we've got to thin this out and we got to come up with a strategy on how we're going to take care of it because it's, I don't want to be in the police business.
If we get a grant, if one of these grants is successful, that's something you want to incorporate in
Absolutely.
the response to these people.
yeah, exactly.
No, I just don't want to
Get
find.
them off on the first contact.
No.
I just don't want to find out one day that we have been having people use a lot more than we anticipated.
We all know, yeah.
And we didn't report what we thought. What
why
was,
we're doing this.
what,
Yeah.
You know, the result was a lot different than what we thought and reported. I don't want to be there.
Right.
I could almost guess that's the case, but I don't think it's a norm. I think most people are pretty good about their reporting.
Well, we're talking like a dozen,
Yeah.
2 dozen at the most.
And just for information, do you know the state has a requirement, if you're not in a GSA and you're out of the area, they require the pumpers to report to the state that amount of water they're using. And they also have a $300 fee, and I believe it's $10 an acre foot for the water they're using, and that goes right to the state.
Yeah,
So that's something you might want to look into for your letter and let the other well owners know what's going on.
And Bert, is it possible for you to send that document or that information to us so we could take a look at it, or at least I could take a look at it? I'd be interested in looking at the parts of that.
well,
that
I'm
program.
actually familiar with that.
Yeah.
You are familiar with it, okay?
Years ago, when I worked for the city of Ventura, with the number of wells that they had, every year we'd complete a report and send it to the state and file the amount of extraction. Back then, it was $10 a report. I don't know what it is today, but it's, but that way, at least if you get it filed through the state, or in our case, filed with OBGMA, you've got a reported extraction. If there's ever an adjudication, you can prove the water you used.
Right.
But if you don't file, then potentially in any adjudication, you may not get any water.
And that is a problem right now. I mean, anyone out there that thinks that they're pumping and, no one's going to know, there's an ongoing adjudication and it's going to be more than us coming after them. So,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, those days
Richard,
are-
I'll send you the link on it. I've got it on my computer. I've got your email, so I'll send it to you.
all right.
Great,
Super,
thank you.
thank you.
Kind of like septic tanks. Those days are numbered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Treasurer's report.
I'll just make it brief. This is for 2 months for July and August, 2022. Income for July was $57,265. Expenditures, $13,264. Bank balance up to $69,608 at that time. Payroll were the major expenditures. Cure groundwater, those 2 items for July. And the extraction report, I'll just say through through August, we have recorded extractions of 4,513 acre feet. So we will have one more month, supposedly. Of course, I don't know how many of those statements were filed from the last quarter. Oh, you won't get them until,
Well, they
Yeah.
come in pretty fast, and I'll be sending them out, sure.
yeah, the end of the, yeah. So we actually won't have that number updated until probably the second month, maybe November, December timeframe. So for August, income was $17,127. Expenditures $13,716. Bank balance increased to $72,800. Major expenses for that month were payroll, legal, and cure groundwater. And that's pretty much it.
Richard, I sent you the link. You got it right now.
What was that?
He sent you.
You have the link.
Good.
I sent it to your email, Richard.
Oh,
Should be
okay.
the state
okay.
water. The state
All right.
water. It's the Office of Groundwater Water Rights.
Is there any water where you're at, Peter?
You talking to me, Richard?
Yes. Is there any water up
Peter,
there?
which Peter?
Oh, Peter in Canada.
Oh, they've had the driest summer since they had a really wet winter, but they haven't had any rain since May.
Oh,
Up in British Columbia here, off the coast of Vancouver.
Huh.
So they're in
tough
the same
everywhere.
boat.
okay. We are adjourned at 4:26.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.